How's it going, everybody? Blaine here for Bridgeport Games. Yesterday in our Pokemon Presents announcement, we got so much information, but one of the best things we got was information on the gimmick for the region. So now instead of Z-moves, instead of Megas or Dynamax, we have this new mechanic called Terastallize. And what it allows you to do is change your Pokemon's type based on a certain Terastallize type that it gets. We're going to cover all that in just a minute, but the real key takeaway is that it can change its type to kind of anything, and it's going to get boosts for moves of that type once it actually activates the mechanic. So what I thought would be interesting is today we're going to go ahead and look at all the Pokemon before Gen 9. Obviously, we don't know all that many details about the Gen 9 Pokemon yet, so I'm going to look at all the existing Pokemon and pick out some of the best possible candidates for this actual mechanic. And it's kind of going to, I think, give us a good idea of how the mechanic works and kind of just what you can expect when this mechanic is actually in competitive Pokemon. Now, we are going to be skewing this kind of more towards VGC, but a lot of this is going to scale up for singles as well, because a lot of the same concepts and same strategies are going to be there. So we're going to go ahead and get started by kind of analyzing how the mechanic works, so we really understand, everything about it, because it wasn't totally clear in the presentation yesterday. So we're going to go ahead and get started, but before I do, I just want to take a second to ask, if you like the videos we have here on the channel, please make sure that you actually like them by hitting that thumbs up button, and of course consider subscribing as well, because honestly, it really does help the channel out a ton, and it's really the only way YouTube will know that you guys love our videos. So please go ahead and hit that button as well. Thank you in advance. But now, let's start talking about Terastallize. So first and foremost, what it says here is this. We don't know if it's based on a held item or anything like that, but every Pokemon has a Terra type. Now, the best way to kind of think about it is like hidden power. When you catch a Pokemon, it can have any Terra type. So you can catch a Eevee that can be electric, fire, ghost, dragon, whatever, and when you Terastallize it, it will become that type. Now, when a Pokemon does Terastallize, it's going to get this big jewel above its head. I imagine there's going to be a different shape for each type, so we'll know exactly kind of what type it is just by looking at it, which is really cool. And then when someone Terastallizes, they do get a power bonus, and if you already were that type and you Terastallize into that type, you get an additional power bonus as well. So kind of really basic. I just summarized it here in, a few different sentences. Pokemon can have any Terra type. When you Terastallize, you'll become that type. Obviously, any moves of that new type are going to get a power boost. And then Pokemon who Terra into one of their normal types get an additional power boost. So the way I really think that this could be viable is offensively by making certain Pokemon have a lot more power to their moves where they may have needed that before. Or maybe if a Pokemon is already really strong, getting the extra boost is going to be able to push them over the top. Alternatively, on the flip side, I think there's a lot of Pokemon that may have been, solid competitive contenders, but maybe like a significant weakness kind of held them back. And I think this is really a cool opportunity to kind of correct that and make some Pokemon who may not have been that great in the past a little more viable now. So let's go ahead and take a look at exactly what I'm talking about here. So I slapped together a couple of Pokemon over here on Pokemon Showdown, and I have them all blurred out except for the one we're going to be talking about because I don't want to spoil any surprises. But one of the first Pokemon that came to mind for me is Salamence. Now, Salamence has always been a very solid competitive Pokemon. It is flying and dragon type. It is really, really awesome and has access to some of the best abilities in the game with Intimidate and Moxie. So Intimidate lets you actually shrink the attack stat of both the opposing Pokemon, and Moxie lets you get stronger if you knock out an opposing Pokemon. So what I've realized is that obviously, Flying Dragon is a great type, but it is significantly weak to Ice, Dragon, and Rock. So I was thinking, what if you Terastallize it into a Steel type? Now I have this calculator up here for Pokemon types. So just for example, let's take a look at Dragon and Flying, not Water. Alright, so as you can see, 4 times weak to Ice, and then weak to Rock, Dragon, and Fairy. However, if we switch that into a Steel type, and no second type, the only thing that's going to be super effective against it is Fire, Ground, and Fighting. Now, the reason I think that's really cool, no one would ever bring any of those to face a Salamence, because Salamence is going to be resisting Fighting and Fire, and it's also going to be immune to Ground normally. So I think you have a really good switch in, and you're now going to be able to resist Fairy and Dragon, and take no damage from Poison as a kicker. So I think that that's really awesome, and that would give Steel Wing, normally a pretty terrible move, another power boost on top of that. Now, we don't know how much, but we do know that by being Steel type, it's going to get Stab in addition to whatever power boost it's going to get, which I think is I think that's really awesome. And I chose Moxie as an ability to go with here because if you are able to kind of start snowballing and get those attack boosts, you're going to make your Pokemon just that much stronger. And then when you actually do switch types, you're going to be able to start picking up that many more KOs because you'll already have all those boosts. Now, for the next Pokemon I want to talk about, we're going to keep it in the Dragon family, and that's actually going to be Garchomp. Now, Garchomp is a lot like Salamence. They're actually very, very similar. And if we look at his stats and his typing here, we see that as a Rock and Ground type Pokemon, again, kind of the same boat, 4 times weak to Ice and also weak to Dragon and Fairy. However, it's very well known that Garchomp's kind of worst move is actually its Dragon, and Ground is usually one of its best options. So I went with like a Swords Dance set here with Earthquake. So in this case, we would actually want to have it most likely Terastallize into a Ground-type Garchomp, so it'll lose that Dragon typing. Now, what that does mean, if we go ahead and just say this has to be Ground, and then this becomes None, it is going to be weak to Water, Grass, and Ice. However, again, most people are not bringing Water and Grass to a Garchomp, and that Ice weakness becomes only like a 2 times instead of a 4 times. Now, if you were to say, get rid of Swords Dance and Protect and give it an item like an Assault Vest, you could very easily handle those Ice-type moves with an extra 50% special defense boost. I don't think it's as incredibly amazing as it is in the case of Salamence, but I do think it is very, very helpful and very useful, and really gives you a lot of options. Now, again, we are talking about one last pseudo legendary here, and that is going to be Metagross. Now, I think there's actually several ways to take Metagross, which is really cool. First of all, though, I do want to look at its typing. So it's Steel and Psychic. And yeah, guys, look, if I get these wrong, if it's actually Psychic Steel, I can't remember all the primary versus secondary. The data's the same, all right? It's going to have the same weaknesses. So if you want to yell at me in the comments, go ahead, but it's going to be fine. So we're going to get through this. All right, so in terms of defensive, it's weak to Ground, Ghost, Fire, and Dark. So offensively, it's kind of notoriously always had a problem dealing damage to Steelmons. It really gets pretty walled by it really hard. But if we go back to defense again, some things that have always been major problems for Metagross are those Fire and Dark type moves, as well as Ground and Ghost. They just do so much damage to it. So honestly, I think in the case of what I set up here, making Metagross either just pure Psychic, pure Steel, or Fighting, or Dark, all are awesome. And it sounds a little strange, I know, but just consider this for a minute. So if we make it pure Psychic, right? We'll make it a Psychic and nothing else. It's going to be weak to 2 of the same things, but the real catch is that it's no longer going to be weak to Fire or Ground. So if your opponent has something like a Groudon, it's a way to get rid of that weakness that you may be kind of facing down. Alternatively, if we make it a pure Steel type, it's going to still have the Fire and Ground weaknesses, but it's going to lose Ghost and Dark. Also, kind of worth noting, if we go ahead and make it a Dark type, it's still going to have a bug issue, but it's going to be now only weak to Fairy and Fighting. Again, those are not typically types that are going to be brought against the Metagross. And something else too, if we go ahead and make it, I believe I said Fighting on the last one. Again, it'll be weak to Psychic, Fairy, and Flying, none of which you would really bring against the Metagross either. So I think Metagross is in a very unique situation where it can become any of these types, and they're all going to be just fantastic. Now, I know I've talked about some powerhouses, so let's take this in a completely different direction and go for the most defensively gimmicky use of this mechanic I can think of. And Wolfie covered this yesterday on his channel, and that's Shedinja. Now look, we're not really going to care about the moves here all that much. It has moves of whatever type you want, but 2 applications I can think of for this. Number 1, if you change it to a normal type Pokemon, it's only going to be able to be damaged by Fighting, and with Wonder Guard, it would have to take a Fighting move to be KO'd. So there are ways to play around that and set up a lot of win scenarios where you can't lose, really. Alternatively, you can make it Electric type, and then Electric only being weak to Ground. If you give it an Air Balloon, it's never going to really take damage, and then will never die. It'll just be there forever. Now, obviously, the one thing I do think here, I'm pretty sure Air Balloon will pop if you're hit by, like, whatever. I don't think you have to take damage for it. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to confess, I don't know that interaction, but it is kind of silly, and I think that if Shedinja is in the game, this could be, like, a very viable VGC strategy. I'm not going to say that people are going to win every tournament with this, because obviously once you know about it, you'll bring some of the common solutions. But even turning into something random like, I don't know, Poison, you know, if your opponent doesn't have a ground or a psychic type move, it could just stall things out and you just lose. So, I don't know, it's an interesting idea. The fact that Wonder Guard can kind of wombo combo with this makes it kind of scary, just because there's a lot of, you can't cover everything, but again, it just kind of represents the kind of lines of thinking you need to have when you start thinking about this mechanic. Now, Dracovish is another one I thought of, and this is completely different to kind of everything else, because Dracovish only really wants to ever have to click Vicious Rend, and that's because it has, not Water Absorb, we want Strong Jaw. Vicious Rend is a biting move, and Strong Jaw is going to double its power, or increase its power by 1.5. And, you know, Vicious Rend is just so strong, if it hits first, it becomes, 170 power, so really, really busted, very, very strong and awesome. When you take away its dragon typing, let's actually go ahead and throw this up on the chart here. So it's dragon and water, so it's damaged by dragon and fairy. This is more so an issue of the max move era. These moves are very common and could just do a ton of damage to a Dracovish. Like, can just nuke it. Because its defenses are okay, but they're not that great. What is interesting, though, is if we go ahead and make it just a pure Watermon, it is going to be weak to Grass and Electric. Now, people may bring those, but they're not going to be, you know, 4 times super effective moves, and it just gives you an option to kind of take away that fairy weakness. So, I don't think this is a huge, you know, crazy situation, but if you're facing down something like, you know, any sort of fairy, like, God forbid, a Xerneas, this just gives you a way to kind of change things up a little bit and give you just that much more longevity, while still keeping your stab and all the other benefits to using Vicious Rend. This is probably the most simple application of it, but it really can show how even just being something so simple can matter quite a bit. And it's going to get the normal power boost from Terastallize, and the extra one because it's already a water-type Pokemon. So, I think that would just become the biggest haymaker in the game. I don't know how powerful it's going to become from 170, but we're now talking about moves that are like Explosion tier, which is nuts. And that also made me think about this Pokemon, and that's going to be Snorlax. So, Snorlax, as we know, is a pure normal type Pokemon, and stat-wise, it's pretty notorious for having pretty good special defense, great HP, but horrible defense. So the way most people go about actually attacking Snorlax is with a physical fighting type move. So what I was thinking, use Zen Headbutt, and you can become a psychic type Snorlax, meaning that you're going to resist fighting. Now, you are going to be weak to Dark and Bug, obviously, but who cares? You're not going to be taking that much damage, and if somebody tries to attack you with like a Shadow Ball, that's fine, because you're going to be so much bulkier on the special defense side, you're going to be able to take at least a few of those, and then hit back with, you know, a Zen Headbutt, or even a Facade if you want to. Obviously, I included Belly Drum on the set just so you can get the most value out of it, but it can really be any sort of boosting move that you want, because Snorlax has just a lot of utility there. And that's going to bring us to my next batch of Pokemon that I put together. And what I want to do, I kind of wanted to shift direction into kind of some different ideas here again. Kind of the similar idea we've been talking about, but we're going to talk about some Pokemon that have been tinkered with in VGC, but kind of held back because of some issues. So the first one I wanted to bring up here is Circuitry. Circuitry is a Pokemon I've always really liked because that special attack stat, 173, is just crazy. Like, that's super high. The rest of its stats kind of stink, but the one big issue is if it ever has really faced down a ground-type Pokemon, even though it has Energy Ball with this crazy stats, it's usually not enough to get through it. Usually they can kind of survive by the skin of their teeth, granted, but still not really, you know, do all that well. So what I was thinking, you can pair it with like a Choice Scarf, assuming we do get items, which would make sense with this. You now have access to your Thunderbolt as you normally do. Protect you obviously wouldn't have in that case. You could have something different like, I don't know, I'm just pulling this, you know, out of the air here, but maybe a Volt Switch. So you could have access to your Energy Ball, become a Grass-type Pokemon, and now, not only are you Grass-type so you resist ground, you also are going to have a super effective move against it, which will have Stab, as well as that Power Boost. And with a special attack like this, giving anything a Power Boost is going to be a huge problem. Now, moving on from there, I actually have the same Pokemon twice, and that is going to be 2 different versions of Groudon. Now, I know I said this is about VGC issues, but Groudon has a lot of applications I think are very interesting. So the first one I wanted to bring up here is sort of a defensive option for Groudon. Now, Groudon usually has some variation of Precipice Blades, Rock Slide, Heat Crash, Fire Punch, something like that. It's not normally a fire Pokemon unless it does primally revert into Primal Groudon, but it does have Drought, increasing the power of those fire-type moves and reducing the effects of water-type moves on it. But one of the ways a lot of people tend to attack Groudon is by hitting it with Ice-type attacks. So that kind of got me thinking we could turn it into a Fire-type Pokemon. And if we do that, we are going to get the ability to use our Heat Crash and have it, again, be boosted. Not only because now you have Stab and the boost, but also because you're going to be in the sun. So your Heat Crash is going to do even more damage, which I think is awesome. But what if we went ahead and set aside Physical Groudon and went for Special Groudon? Special Groudon was a little more common back when we had Primals, but it's still viable now. I mean, Special Attack of 100 is not great by any means, but just hear me out. This is kind of an interesting idea. So we have Lava Plume and Earth Power to kind of take advantage of our Stab as well as the Sun, but we also have access to Solar Beam. Now, if we can use that mechanic to turn Groudon into a Grass-type Pokemon, it's going to be still weak to Ice types, but it's going to be able to resist those Water types. So, hypothetically, if you're pairing up against a Kyogre and you do have the Sun up, you know, firing a Water Spout at a Groudon is not that bad because you're still going to do a lot of damage. However, if you do become a Grass type, now you're going to have resistance against their Water type attacks, and the Sun is up, meaning it's not going to do that much damage. If they do go for an Ice Beam, it'll still do quite a bit, but at the very least, they're not hitting you with Stab, so it's not going to be that bad compared to some of the other options. Now, speaking of Ice types, the next Pokemon I actually have is one that I find really interesting, and that's Gallardemanitan. So, the only reason it's really here is because it has so many coverage moves. Now, we're talking about a mon that's pure Ice, yeah? So, it's going to be weak to Fighting, Rock, Steel, and Fire. Now, what I thought was cool, its best moves are going to be Icicle Crash, Flare Blitz, Rock Slide, and Superpower. All these moves can basically get around these weaknesses that we see here. So if we make him a pure Fighting type, that's going to go ahead and make us so we're resisting Rock and also resisting Bug and Dark. So that does solve at least some of the issues there and makes us neutral against Fire as well as Steel. However, if we go ahead and make it, say, a Rock-type Pokemon with Rock Slide, then we're going to see that it's going to resist that Fire-type attack, and now we're also going to be neutral against Rock, which is pretty nice. And we are still going to be weak to Fighting and Steel, but it does give us some options for doing more super effective damage, which is cool. Alternatively, if we go ahead and make ourselves Fire-type, which we can do with our Flare Blitz, we're going to take resisted damage from Fire and Steel. We will take super effective from Rock, but again, it kind of just gives you some options to get away from that weakness you may have. And of course, we can stay in Ice type if we want. But the real thing I like here, look at these moves. Superpower, 120 base power. Flare Blitz, 120. Icicle Crash, 85, but normally with Stab. And Rock Slide is 75, but is one of the best spread moves, so you kind of have to make some sacrifices there. But Gallardemanitan has a 140 base attack, and Guerrilla Tactics adds it as its ability, giving it a 1.5 boost to its attack. So that means if you get that additional boost from your Terastallize, it's going to do just that much more damage, which I think is just mind-bogglingly awesome how much damage we can put out there. Now, another idea, I was trying to get an idea of like Pokemon that have these natural boosts that then you can kind of tinker with their types to make them viable. Another one that kind of came to mind there was Kommo-o. So Kommo-o has never really caught on in VGC all that well, and really that 4 times Fairy weakness is, frankly, just crippling for it. And you know what? It has some pretty solid abilities too. It can be immune to powder, so things like Rage Powder, Sleep Powder, no good. It has Bulletproof, so Shadow Ball, Sludge Bomb, you're immune to that. Or Soundproof, you'll become immune to things like, Hyper Voice. So there's just a lot of really interesting options here that would be available. So I wanted to capitalize on using Clangorous Soul. It's a move where you sacrifice 33% of your HP, and in exchange you get +1 to all of your stats. So I wanted to keep his natural stab moves because Close Combat and Dragon Claw are both really good. Like, they do a lot of damage. I mean, obviously Close Combat just being 120 and so spammable, especially if you're +1, and Dragon Claw as well. But I wanted to have this kind of as like an ace in your back pocket. If you happen to come up against a Fairy, boom, become a Steel type, use your Iron Head. So as we know, let's just take a look real quick at a pure Steel type. If you do become a Steel type, you're going to have to deal with Fighting, Ground, and Fire. But again, people are not going to typically bring those to face a Como-O because you don't want to give it the time to set up. Like, if you're able to give it the time to kind of get rolling, it's going to just take you to the cleaners. I mean, it's just so powerful. So, I mean, if we look, for example, Fighting and Dragon, it is weak to Flying, Psychic, Ice, Dragon, and Fairy. And it takes neutral from Ground and Fighting. But then, of course, it also resists Fire. So these are not the common strategies people are going to use to try and target you down. If we do become that pure Steel type again, we are going to take half damage from Dragon and Steels and Fairy. And Flying. Jeez. So all the things that are going to target you down, including Ice, are going to be resisted. It just kind of flips the entire table on its head. So even though Steel Iron Head is kind of just meh, and it's okay, it's a good move, but damage-wise, it's not... You're not hitting it out of the park. It's just it's a solid play to first base. We'll say that. But being able to use that is really, really awesome. I think it's just fantastic. And then another Pokemon that has been... I have always hated the following Pokemon because it has a type that is completely useless. And that is Tapu Bulu. I like a lot about Tapu Bulu. It is a fairy Pokemon in name only. It only gets one fairy move, and that is Dazzling Gleam. I believe it... Does it get any others? Nature's Madness. I apologize. I forgot about that one. It does not have Play Rough. I'm so frustrated by this Pokemon because of that, because... Let's take a look at the type chart. So, normal grass is weak to Flying, Poison, Bug, Fire, and Ice. Not great. If we make that into a fairy type, it now takes double damage from Poison, and it's basically swapping out Bug for Fire, and it's swapping out... What was the other one? It's whatever it is. We're now taking damage from Steel as well. Look, this is quite bad. The issue is that so many of these types are common in VGC. So, admittedly, Poison is not the most common typing, I will grant you that. However, Flying, Steel, Fire, and Ice, for a myriad of reasons, are all extremely common in VGC. Flying is a great, a spammable move because it's hard to switch into. Steel has all those defenses, so usually people have a Steelmon with just a random stab move. Fire takes care of Steel, which is why you have it. And then Ice takes care of Grass and Dragons, which is why it's also pretty common. So the fact that you can kind of just tinker with those a little bit, and you can remove, you're still going to have some of those, I mean, inevitably, but the fact that you can just scale some of those back, including getting rid of that Steel weakness, personally, I think is big enough to make Bulu at least be potentially usable. I'll say that, and coming from me, that's high praise. It may not sound like it, but it really is. But the other thing I think is really cool, so Bulu has a 130 base attack, pretty good. It has Grassy Surge, so you're going to increase your grass-type attacks. So your Horn Leech and your Wood Hammer are going to do all that much more damage. On top of that, though, you're going to get your boost and your extra boost because you're already a Grass-type Pokemon. So, because of that, I mean, I don't know how much these boosts are going to be. Even if it's something like 30%, like a Life Orb, that's still going to be enough damage to make Bulu a pretty big contender. And the best part is, as far as we know, we'll get to use items in conjunction with this mechanic, so that'll leave us open for another Life Orb to actually boost it to 1.6. I know the math doesn't quite work out that way, just whatever. We're brainstorming here, we're just kind of spitballing. Or something like a Focus Sash or a Choice Scarf. A lot of options there, which I think is great. And that's going to take us to our third and final batch of Pokemon. Alright, now I'm rounding things off with some Pokemon that I asked people for some kind of ideas of what they were thinking. And these are some of the ones that got brought up for kind of, admittedly, very specific reasons. But I think some of them are really, really cool and really give you just, again, some ideas for what this mechanic is capable of. So the first one is a Pokemon that I've wanted to make work forever, and that is Toxicity. Now, good old buddy here, Toxicity, has a very unique typing in Electric and Poison. Unfortunately, he is weak to Ground and Psychic. So I was trying to think of a way you can utilize kind of his existing framework and become more powerful. So he has this ability called Punk Rock, which he receives half damage from sound moves, and his own sound moves do 1.3 times power. So that immediately made me think of Hyper Voice, a spread move that deals 90 damage. It is sound-based, and it is a normal type. So what you could do, especially if you pair it with a throat spray, right off the bat, you can go ahead and normal Terastallize your Toxicity. And then what's really dope, so right here, as it is, it's going to resist fighting because it is a poison type. So nobody would think to bring a fighting type against a Toxicity, but if you make it normal and no second typing, you're only going to be weak to fighting and immune to Ghost, by the way. And now you have Hyper Voice that has stab and the boost, and when you go ahead and attack, you're going to get that 1-stage special attack boost from your Throat Spray. So not only, see, first of all, normal, stab, bonus, Throat Spray, and Punk Rock. This thing is going to be doing a just ton of damage. And the cool thing is, if you don't want to use Throat Spray too, you can throw on like a Choice Scarf because its stats are kind of questionable in the speed department, but there are ways to correct that. Speaking of normal powerhouses, this one was actually suggested by the other two guys on the channel, Mike and Tom, and they recommended Porygon Z. Now, Porygon Z is really only here for one reason. It has adaptability, which means Pokemon stabs with 2 times damage instead of 1.5. So what that's going to mean, basically, Porygon is going to be able to switch into whatever typing and get those bonuses, but hit with a much stronger stab than normal. So some common options you have here are Tri-Attack, Shadow Ball, and Psychic. So you can keep him normal type and just drive his normal stats over the top. Or again, as it does typically get attacked by fighting, you could go ahead and make it either resisting fighting with Psychic, or immune to Psychic, or immune to fighting with making it a Ghost type. So all 3 of these are great options. On top of that, it has access to Ice, Electric, Dark. So really, you can kind of do whatever you want with Porygon Z. And with its adaptability, it's going to be just off the charts strong. So I pretty highly recommend this one because I actually think it's really, really strong. And just a really great example of how abusable this mechanic can be. Coming from there, we have Guzzlord, another Pokemon that has been rendered useless because of its typing. So it is Dark and Dragon, which is another term for fairy food, but it does have this crazy high special attack, or crazy high HP stat, in 223, and then kind of average stats everywhere else. But I think we have something there we can use. Now, I wanted to leave it with its base stab moves. I think those are useful to have regardless. But what if we make Guzzlord a poison type? So we have Dragon and Dark. We see it as weak to fighting, Bug, Ice, Dragon, and Fairy. So the most common ones I would imagine people are bringing against it are going to be Fighting, Dragon, and Fairy. Now, if we go ahead and make it a pure poison type, we are going to be now weak to Ground and Psychic, which is not that big a deal because, again, people wouldn't bring that against the Guzzlord. But now we are resisting Fairy and Fighting, and we're neutral against Dragon, which there's not a lot of ways we can get around that, so it is what it is. But just being able to remove those weaknesses really is going to help it capitalize on that massive HP stat. And then you have the ability to use something like a Choice Specs, Life Orb, whatever you want to increase that damage output. And then as long, presumably, as your special attack is high enough, once you knock something out, you're going to start getting those attack boosts from your Beast Boost. So that'll make your Pokemon even stronger, which I think is just great. I want to move from there to a standout little darling in VGC who its weaknesses are actually why it's good, but what if we have a way to kind of capitalize on that afterward? And by the way, shout outs to Tom Hayden, friend of the channel. He uses this in his Draft League teams. I'm talking about Colossal. So now Colossal is Rock and Fire. If I'm being honest, it's a horrid typing because of that 4 times weakness to Ground and Water. So that got me thinking though. It has Steam Engine. A lot of times people are going to give it a weakness policy. This is going to get quite a bit worse in the era without Dynamax. That being said though, you could also use a Power Herb. Where is it? With Meteor Beam, and that way you get a +1 special attack boost, and you can really just hit something really hard. Steam Engine also gives it a +6 speed, making it incredibly powerful if it is hit by a water-type move. So, let's say you get set up and you're, ready to rock and roll. Most people are going to try and hit you with water-type moves. What if you could resist it and use something like a Solar Beam? Now, I was thinking you could turn it into a Grass-type Pokemon. It is going to... Let's refer to the chart real quick here. So, Fire and Rock, as we know, weak to Ground and Water, Fighting and Rock, unfortunately. But if we go ahead and make it a pure Grass type, we are going to see it's now weak to Flying, Poison, Bug, Fire, and Ice. None of those would ever get brought against a Colossal because of its typing. All those would just get steamrolled by it. No pun intended. You know what? Screw it. Pun very intended. But that's the thing, is like, we don't know right now if people are going to be able to know what your Terra typing is. But if you're able to have a grass Terra-typed Colossal, I think it has a lot of possibilities for a lot of mind games, and you're going to be able to make your Solar Beams that much stronger and just do a ton of damage. Does it have Solar Blade as well? It does not, okay. So that's really the only grass type option would be Solar Beam, but if you pair it with a Sunsetter, like a Torkoal or whatever, you're going to be able to just fire off those big grass Solar Beams with Stab and with that boost, and you'll just do so much damage and take almost none in return. And by the way, grass also resists ground, so you're really taking away its two largest weaknesses and turning them into resistances, which I think is just awesome. Kind of for the last two Pokemon in the same vein that I've been looking at, you know, Porygon Z, Toxicity, I wanted to look at abilities that we might be able to abuse and kind of use the mechanic to tinker with it that way. So the next one I had was Durant. As we know, Durant is quite the pest, and you know what? He is very strong. He has this ability called Hustle, so even though his stats look pretty mediocre at a 109 attack, Hustle multiplies Pokemon's attacks by 1.5, and accuracy goes down, but that's fine. It's not great, but it is what it is with this situation here. So people typically use things like Iron Head and you know, X-Scissor, and then just have Rock Slide, but what if we could make it into a Rock-type Pokemon? Typically Durant, because it is 4 times weak to Fire, people are going to tend to attack it that way because it's just such a common strategy here. So it really only is weak to Fire. So what if we went ahead and made that, again, a Rock-type Pokemon with none here? We are going to pick up a whole host of weaknesses, but they're, again, as we said, not moves that are going to really be brought against a Durant all that often. And then what's going to be really interesting is your Rock Slides. You know, with Hustle, they are going to be really strong, but they are only base 75. They're going to get a Stab boost, and then also become boosted from Terastallize, meaning that you now have this spread move that is boosted through Hustle, the boost, and Stab, not including even a held item. So if you slap a Life Orb on top of this, you're now talking about doing some pretty serious damage, and, you know, spamming Rock Slide off a Pokemon that's somewhat fast, like 109, it can do a lot of damage. And, you know, I realize this is a little gimmicky, so I decided to go full level 10, you know, level 100 gimmick for the last one, and that's Malomar, because it has Contrary and Superpower. So now, people have known about this since back in X and Y. If you can just spam Superpower and it'll keep getting attack and defense boosts. The problem is, though, Dark and Psychic is a really bad typing. And, you know, I don't care who disagrees with me. You're 4 times weak to Bug and you're weak to Fairy. So, like, Bug is not a great typing, sorry, A-Drive, but a lot of people have access to U-Turn, so you do tend to run into problems where you're just taking a lot of, like, chip damage. So I kind of wanted a way to tweak that and kind of reevaluate how we can use it. So that's when I thought about making it into just a fighting-type Pokemon. You're trading out 2 weaknesses for 3, but you are picking up some more resistances, which is nice. On the flip side, though, your Superpower is now going to have Stab and also do more damage, which is something that's always needed because 92 attack is really not great. And even though it's a really cool Pokemon that has some really solid, like, in-game moves, using it for this mechanic, you've always had to kind of, like, hit 2 or so until you can actually start sweeping. So being able to actually just remove that element from the board, I think is pretty clutch and pretty crucial, because now you have Superpower, meaning that these attack stats and defense stats are going to just fly through the roof with Stab and that boost. So what you really want to do is pick up a KO and then start snowballing, and I really think that with Terastallize, that's something you could pull off pretty easily. So that's all the Pokemon I have for you right now. Again, let me know which ones your favorite are, and let me know what your strategies are for some Terastallize Pokemon, because I want to hear from you. I want to know what you guys are thinking. I think this mechanic is awesome, and I can't wait to see how it's used in competitive. Alright, so there you have it, everybody. My best picks for all the Terastallize Pokemon that I think could be actually very viable and very good in competitive VGC. So, that being said, guys, again, let me know what Pokemon you think might be the best ones, and let me know what you think about my picks. Do you like them? Do you not? Whatever it is, let me know down below, because I want to hear from you. That being said, everybody, I want to thank you all so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. I am so excited about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and this new mechanic, and I hope you are too. And if you're as hyped as I am, make sure you hit that like button in the face with a Giga Impact, and make sure, of course, that you subscribe to the channel, because that's the best way to let YouTube know that you guys love our content so we can keep bringing it to you. So that being said, everybody, thank you so much for stopping by. Please, as always, remember that the best Pokemon games are the ones that you love to play and the proper ways to play them, however you have the most fun. As always, I hope each and every one of you have a happy, epic, awesome, and amazing day, and I will see you in the next video. See you around. Bye-bye.